Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Defender podcast, where we share news and all kinds of snackable, practical tips for your Microsoft security. I'm recording once again. My name is Koos. I'm recording once again live from my home in the Netherlands. And when I take a shovel and put it on the earth and dug all the way to the other side of our planet, I end up with my mate down under. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Hey, doing well, doing well. I tell you what, though, we have had the craziest weather here, and I think it probably hasn't stopped raining since the last time we recorded
Really?
an episode. Yeah, so it's just crazy stuff going on here, just flooding everywhere and just crazy rain. But hey, favorite part of the month. So super excited to be recording again, and we have a lot to talk about today, right? A lot has happened. We've
Yes.
packed more than a month's worth of things in since the last time we spoke, and there's been Las Vegas. So I'm keen to hear all about your trip to DEF CON and Black Hat. Also, Experts Live US, which is coming up for us. So that'll be a fun one to talk about. So we've definitely got to get to that as well.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff to talk about today. I think, Lake It Till You Make It, which is just the best title ever. So looking forward to hearing some data lake stories and information from you. And then, I want to touch a little bit on PIM today. We keep talking about this thing called PIM. And so keen to dive into it and talk about it. But hey, before we get there, tell us about Vegas. You are sporting a bit of a tan, so I think you've looked like you had a little bit of a good time when you went
Well,
to
I'm not
Vegas.
sure about that. I deliberately went inside as much as possible because it was 44 degrees Celsius outside. So I actually felt a little bit sick after I got back. I'm not sure if it's the time difference or the temperature difference, because I think there's at least 20 degrees Celsius difference outside and inside where you're walking in and out of those casinos. But yeah, I had a blast. People who follow me on LinkedIn probably saw a couple of updates. I did a daily update trying to explain what's going on in Las Vegas. No, I actually absolutely had a blast on both conferences. I was looking forward to both of them. Black Hat was more like formal business, but also deep technical sessions. And DEF CON was, like you said to me earlier, Chris, Hacker Summer Camp. It was crazy in all kinds of ways, and I also enjoyed myself a lot during those days. It was fun. It was too short as well. There was so much information to
Yeah,
to uh, to digest, and only a couple of days. But yeah,
it is packed in,
who
and I
knows?
think,
We can go together next year.
yeah, let's hope so. I think, for all our American listeners who are listening, going 44 Celsius. What are you talking about? I think that's about 100 or 101 Fahrenheit. So it's a pretty hot day. But I'm keen to. So you mentioned that Black Hat was really deep technical as well, and I was kind of going to ask you is, of the two, which was your favorite? Did you have a clear favorite, or were they
Ooh.
very different but still equally enjoyable?
They're so different. So at Black Hat, I saw a couple of briefings, as they call them, by a few security researchers who did all kinds of things. Some of them were about Entra ID, how to manipulate tokens, token theft, caching of tokens, abusing tokens, abusing passkeys, cached credentials in all kinds of ways. Was really useful stuff, and again, really deep technical stuff. I like to see more about that. I didn't go as much to the business expo show floor that much. I was really in there for the technical briefings, but also sessions about running malware on macOS, and it was not Microsoft specific. That was also, I think, something I really enjoyed about it. I'm so used going to Microsoft conferences, and this was specifically a way for me to step out of that Microsoft bubble for a change, and I really enjoy that. DEF CON is so different, and I can imagine it's not for everyone, but I really like it. I think you either like it or you hate it. It gave me those LAN party vibes of the 90s and
Yes.
zeros. It's like people running around with antennas sticking out of their backpacks. It's LED
Yes.
screens on their hats or whatever. It's crazy. And I really like the others to look get a glimpse in the other side of security. Like, I really enjoyed Social Engineering Village, the social engineering contest they have going on. I dabbled a little bit in lockpicking, bought myself a lockpicking set as well. So a lot of offensive stuff, also physical security. So it was so different that I was really liking it. I can imagine. Yeah, I was going to say maybe not visiting. Maybe somebody. Not everybody would want to visit it every year, but I would want to visit it every year because it
Yeah,
was so fun and of the atmosphere that was going on, and it was just a bunch of nerds together in a good way, and
yeah.
everybody was so social as well. And Black Hat again was more formal and
Mm.
was also fine, but it didn't had those fun talks with people standing in line I got from DEF CON as well. So I think you should go to both if you're visiting Vegas for Black Hat. I should think you should at least visit the DEF CON once and see if it's
Yeah.
something for you.
Yeah, my experience was that it was so different to anything that you are used to in the Microsoft ecosystem and in the Microsoft world that it's worth doing, even if it is just once. So I'm glad you had a good time. And yeah, like you said, hopefully next year I get to make the trip over as well, and we can kind of meet up there and catch up together. So
Yeah,
very
will be
cool.
great. Yeah, and
So
we're going to see each other in October in New York City.
yes, yes, I'm very much looking forward to that. Experts Live US. I think a lot of folks listening to the show are probably familiar with Experts Live and the Experts Live conferences that are sort of all over the place. I have had the privilege of being at Experts Live Australia. I think it was last year or the year before that,
Hmm.
here in Sydney. Fantastic conference, and Experts Live Europe has been on my bucket list for a long, long time. So maybe we'll get there someday. But yeah, Experts Live US. First time I think that this is being held in the
Yes.
US and New York City. So that's going to be fun. I very much looking forward to being there. Looking forward to seeing you there. Maybe we might throw a little podcast together while we're there and
We
stuff
have
like
to
that.
make
So I
that
think that's
happen.
gonna be really fun. But I think we'll touch on it again before we close off the episode. But to
Yeah.
anyone who's sort of in and around, I guess the US and New York area, real value for your money. I think $15
Yeah.
for a conference ticket, definitely worth checking out. And also all the money's going to a really, really good cause. So we'll post some links, and no doubt you'll see us talking about or hear us talking about Experts Live US a little bit more as we run up to the conference. I think October 10th, I think, is the date. So
Yeah. And we're now recording our 10th episode, so we're doing this every month. So we have not broken the streak just yet, which is great, I guess.
that's
And
awesome.
in October we will, well, let's try to record our final episode for this season, I guess,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
move
So I
into
think
a
it'll be,
second season for next year.
yeah. So no, it should be really good fun. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone's kind of dying to get into the nitty gritty, right?
Yeah.
So
Sorry
so
for the long
Koos,
introduction, people.
no, no. Take us through uh, the Sentinel show and Sentinel Data Lake. Koos, what have you got
Yeah,
for us?
well, it's funny that you say that. I actually promised myself, you and our listeners, to not make this the Sentinel show. Right? People know me from my talks and my blogs about Sentinel, and I wanted to move away a little bit from being that Sentinel guy a bit, and dabble in the other Microsoft security products as well. But sometimes Microsoft just doesn't give you any choice, I guess. So the recent release of Sentinel Data Lake, I think, is too big to ignore. So yeah, we have to talk about Sentinel today. This time, not out of laziness, because I couldn't came up with another topic to talk about. But I think it's a very important and big update coming to Sentinel, and I think it will seriously impact how people use Sentinel and how they think about cost and retention and whatnot. So yeah, let's kick that off, and then I want to hear all from you about privileged identity management, Chris.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Sentinel Data Lake, and I thought it was already funny that a PM pointed out to me that Data Lake should be pronounced in lowercase this time. I don't know why. Marketing came up with that, I guess. So if you look closely at the documentation, Microsoft Sentinel Data Lake is always in lowercase, but we as IT guys tend to have the uppercase the first character of every word, right? So I had to really force myself to put it down in a correct way. Fun fact. So yeah, I was talking about this in episode 4, I believe, already a couple of months ago. That security departments are struggling with their need for security data. How are they going to retain as much data as possible? With the pricing model of which Sentinel is using, paying per gigabyte which you ingest, there's always a debate about, is this really useful enough to store in Sentinel or not? Because like high volume logs coming from firewalls, network equipment, and maybe some other third party solutions, or even your EDR solution can really flood the tables, so to speak, and you end up with a bill maybe of thousands, tens of thousands of euros a month or dollars a month, whatever. And you might argue, is this data worth that much money? And sometimes you just want to keep data for incident response purposes, maybe for regulatory compliance needs or whatever. And I've seen security divisions struggle with that, and that's also why I talked about Azure Data Explorer in the past, which is a cheaper alternative to put alongside Sentinel, and you can still KQL your data in there, but I always acknowledged that there were some downsides to that approach as well. So you have to set up an additional resource in Azure. You have to maintain it, monitor it. Bringing over the data there can be sometimes a hassle. And then at the end, the data is also separated. So over time, customers tend to store data in different silos. So they have their gold silo, so to speak, which is Microsoft Sentinel. They have Azure Data Explorer as maybe their silver silo, and then they might want to store some data in really, really cheap Azure Blob Storage as well as maybe their bronze silo or whatever, just to use that analogy. But then the data is spread across different sources. And although you can KQL your data from Azure Data Explorer from the Defender portal, it was never a really, really nice user experience. And I think Microsoft knew this for a long time. And I think Data Lake is really coming up with a great alternative in that way. I heard Mark Kendrick, which is a principal product manager at Microsoft, describing this very nicely on the Azure Security podcast a while ago. He was calling it data adjacency. So data living alongside each other, but not connected in any ways. And I think it was a cool analogy. So the great thing with Data Lake, everything you put into Sentinel, when you enable Data Lake, it automatically mirrors all that data into the lake by default. So everything that comes into Sentinel is also going into your Data Lake. So you can decide to ingest new logs exclusively into the Data Lake, or and choose to later promote it to analytics logs, or logs that are going to analytics table right now and mirrored to the data lake. You can say, okay, I want to keep my retention at 90 days for the workspace, for example, but I want the retention in the lake to be a year or 2 years or even 12 years, I believe is the maximum right now.
Wow.
So yeah, so you can store your logs really long. And the great thing is that the UI experience is seamless, right? So you can just query the data and it will be taken from the data lake once you go over the threshold of your data retention and workspace. So yeah, this is already really great. I think Data Lake essentially combines a couple of features Microsoft Sentinel came up with the last couple of years. So we had Sentinel auxiliary logs a while ago. Well, it went GA on April 1st this year, actually. That was the cheapest log solution we had up until now. But it was quite limited. It was limited to custom log tables only. There were some limitations with dynamic data types, which you had to work around. There was also basic logs, which was the earlier attempt of Microsoft to provide some low-cost storage, also with its own pros and cons. So there were those multiple table tiers, and customers were struggling also to find what is the right tier for me and how can we work around each of the limitations. And I think now with Data Lake, it seems like they're superseding basic logs and auxiliary logs altogether and just talking about analytic logs for real-time analytics and Data Lake, which makes it much easier, I guess, especially with a lot of those downsides of each of those earlier tiers out of the way.
Are those other options, are they going away or are they still available, but just, I guess, less emphasized?
Well, they are still available because Data Lake is in preview right now.
Okay.
And there are also a couple of other things that are changing in Sentinel land. So Sentinel was natively an Azure resource from the get-go, right? Starting in
Mm,
2019 or something when it became general available. It always has been an Azure resource, but with the recent migrations of all the Microsoft security product into the Defender portal, Sentinel was becoming a little bit of the outlier. So at first, Sentinel was maybe the orchestrator, orchestrating all the different security products. Now the Defender portal, the security.microsoft.com, was becoming more of that role, and Sentinel was the outlier in living in Azure. But so Microsoft recently, well, not really recently, a year ago, something, they integrated Sentinel in the Defender portal, and they announced recently that they are going to enforce that from, I believe it's July next year or something like that. So when you onboard your first Sentinel workspace right now in your tenant for the first time, that workspace will still be visible in Azure, but all the pages will be redirected to the Defender portal. So your Sentinel workspace is automatically onboarded in a unified SOC experience. Starting a year from now, there won't be any Azure resource visible any longer. It will still probably be
interesting.
underwater some kind of log analytics workspace, but when you deploy Sentinel, you do that from the Defender portal, and it will live in the Defender portal only.
And I guess the reason that it is still an Azure resource is because Sentinel is built on log analytics, and log
Yeah.
analytics itself is an Azure resource, right? So I guess,
Yes.
yeah, if they're going to be obfuscating that sort of layer, right, where I'm going to do a Sentinel thing, I'm doing it
Yeah.
through the security, the Defender portal. Therefore, we can't actually get to that stuff through Azure anymore. It makes sense. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of admins who are really pleased with that, because if you're already doing everything else in the security center, then
Yeah.
why would you keep wanting to jump back into the Azure? And that Azure portal is a bit of messy sometimes as well.
Yeah, and Microsoft already demonstrated that the Defender portal has a much richer and better user interface for
Mm,
advanced incident response, the digging through all the graph, the whole the graphical representation is much better than the limited things they have in the Azure portal, right? Which haven't
mm,
changed much for the last years. And also with Security Copilot coming up, being integrated in Defender the portal, they want to integrate that with Sentinel as well, but are they going to reverse engineer some kind of UI in the Azure portal or not? Well, they're not going to do that. So that's why I think the push is very logical.
yeah.
But so also Data Lake is only available if you also opt in to onboard your Sentinel workspace into the Defender portal, or if you're a new customer, that's by default. So that's an important thing to know. I saw a meme coming by, a Scooby Doo meme about Data Lake, and I think it was kind of funny. I put it in the show notes, but I think it doesn't do Data Lake justice, to be honest. So people were making jokes that Data Lake is just a new name for Sentinel auxiliary logs. Well, again, I think it's not really fair to it's just too easy to say that. Again, basic logs, auxiliary logs, all of that is now abstracted away in the data lake layer, so to
Mm,
speak. When I'm going to store something in the data lake, i.e., auxiliary logs in the backend, perhaps, I don't know. You don't have to set up additional data collection rules,
mm,
prepare your schema beforehand. Microsoft will take that out of your hands. So I think it's, yeah, again, there are a couple of downsides I want to touch on later. But one of the things they announced alongside the data lake integration is also VS Code Jupyter Notebook integration. Are you familiar with Jupyter Notebooks, Chris?
somewhat. It's not something I use daily, but definitely familiar with the uses, I guess, in the industry, right, and how folks use those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so a Jupyter Notebook is actually an ordered list of input and output cells. So you can store it as a Jupyter Notebook file. You can share it with colleagues, and colleagues can open it up and run those inputs and see those outputs being updated as well. It's
Mm,
being used for all kinds of data analytic purposes, and also for advanced hunting purposes, for example. I put a screenshot in the show notes as well from the Microsoft documentation. And alongside with Data Lake, they announced a VS Code plugin in preview so that you can create your Jupyter notebooks and query the data lake from there. And since Jupyter Notebooks is built upon all kinds of Python libraries, you can import all kinds of visualization tools and other scripting languages to really manipulate and work with the large scale data. One fun thing, fun fact I want to touch on when I talk about Jupyter Notebooks is always coming up with my colleagues. We have a little bit of a debate. We had a little bit of a debate on that. How do we pronounce Jupyter Notebooks? Is it Jupyter or Jupyter? And because of Python being the one of the main sources of Jupyter notebooks, that's why people are arguing for Jupyter notebooks, and it's also spelled with a Y, right? So
Mhm.
looking at the spelling, and then I saw the two founders from IPython back in the day. It was created by Fernando Perez and Brian Granger, and they pronounced it as Jupyter Notebook, and I was like, that's weird. Why are they pronouncing it Jupyter
Mm.
when it should be Jupyter, right? And then I went into Wikipedia, and it actually says it is pronounced Jupiter because it has some kind of link and also the logo to the Galileo's discovery of the moons of Jupiter. So that's why. So just to set the record straight for everybody yelling at their car speakers right now that I'm pronouncing it so incorrectly. No, I'm not. It's
you
Jupiter. It's
you heard it here
Jupiter
first,
Notebook.
folks.
Sorry. So now that we have that out of our way, there are still a couple of caveats to Data Lake, and well, this is also in preview, so it might be as expected. But I get the feeling whenever Microsoft ships a new feature, customers and the MVP community and everyone is happy for a couple of minutes, and then we immediately want more. Right? We're
Mm.
already complaining, why is this not in the product, and when is this coming? And I think that's also fair. We were looking forward to this, and it's not maybe 100% complete just yet. So there are things people are wishing for in Data Lake, like extending the XDR data. So, for example, your Defender for Endpoint tables, like device network events, for example. A lot of events coming in those tables. They're only queryable for 30 days on the Defender portal. People want to extend that, and I actually built a tool in the past to extend it into Data Explorer, but again there are some limitations to that, and these tables are still when you go to Sentinel, you can see those tables, and they're named XDR tables. So you have analytics tables in Sentinel, you have data lake tables in Sentinel now, and you have XDR tables. Those are the native Defender tables. Since these are not natively stored in Sentinel at that moment, you cannot extend them into Data Lake. Well, this is one of the things I wanted to share as a tip. It looks like you can extend it to Data Lake. So when you go into device network events, for example, and you say, okay, I want to retain this for 1 year on my Data Lake, then Microsoft will enable the data connector for you, streaming all that data to Sentinel first, which mirrors it into the Data Lake, and give you a year of retention. But there's a huge downside to that, because now you're streaming all of those native logs from the device network events into Sentinel, causing a lot of additional ingest costs. So please do not do that. I think a bigger warning label on this would have been highly appreciated in the portal, because it says that it will affect your bill, but well, I think they could have increased the font size on that one. So that's something to be aware of. I saw MVPs in the community blogging about a workaround of storing the XDR logs into an auxiliary table first and then mirror it into Data Lake. Well, to be honest, I think that would defeat the purpose of having a streamlined
Mm.
integration with Data Lake. And I think my best guess is Microsoft will continue to extend Data Lake capabilities in the future. And since they're still in preview, who knows? And we'll see when it hits GA, right? So yeah, but it's a great step in the right direction. Again, not having to set up additional data collection rules and schemas and messing with different table tiers and figuring out all the pros and cons of each makes it so much easier. So I think this is actually a great new feature of Sentinel.
Very cool. Yeah, that's it sounds like there's continues to be just a lot of improvement and maturity in Sentinel, right? It's just not a product that is ever going to just be left alone. And I think that's a really good thing, especially for folks coming into the market and wanting to continuously sort of improve things. But I also wonder, if you're if you have a very large Sentinel environment right now that you've been using for years, how do these changes impact your operations? Right. I mean, are customers constantly tweaking the way that they've got Sentinel deployed, or have they deployed it in one way and they just leave it that way and forget about all the new features until whenever they really need them?
No, I don't know. I think if you have a large Sentinel environment, you have probably already looked into things like Azure Data Explorer alongside,
Mm,
because of the high ingest cost for Sentinel. You
yeah.
have probably also built a lot of complex, bespoke solutions with complex transformations, like ingesting data but dropping certain tables, or ingesting data but only letting certain values of key pairs through, like for example, ingest only alerts from your Palo Alto instead of all of the raw logs, for example. And I think with Data Lake, it makes it so much easier that you can just mirror everything into the lake at
Mm,
a reasonably low cost price. Um, I think large organizations, really large organizations, which are already now using Azure Data Explorer, might not be jumping on the wagon right away to move everything back into Data Lake. I think Azure Data Explorer can still, with large scale operations, can still be cheaper than Data Lake.
mm,
If you accept the fact that it lives in a different silo and you're okay with that, that's fine. But I think this really brings a lot of more capabilities back to where the SOC has the need to store certain logs for incident response, but it wasn't there because it was too expensive. Now with Data Lake, you can ingest it, store it cheaply,
mm.
and query it perhaps more slowly, but at least the data is there. And I think that's a really, I think people were dropping a lot of data in the last couple of years just to keep the cost in check. And
It sounds like this also helps simplify things, right? If you've built all these overly complex
yeah.
solutions now, this will just help you with the same functionality and capability, but just at a lot more simplistic approach. So that does
Yeah,
sound
and one
really
thing
good.
you trigger me to mention one other thing. Before, if you wanted to increase the retention of your data, you had the maximum retention of log analytics, which was a default retention limit of 720 days, I believe. So 2 years. And after 2 years, you could store the data in an archive, but then you had to
Mm,
restore stuff from the archive first before you can query it again. So Data Lake, again, combining a lot of existing features, makes it so much easier. So you can just extend logs after 30 or 90 days into the data lake and keep it for 12 years there. You can just query the data whenever you like.
mm. Okay. Oh, very nice. I think this is great. Thanks for bringing this to everyone's attention. I'm sure
Yeah.
all the hardcore Sentinel nerds are going to be looking at this,
Yeah, I
and
put a
willing to
couple of links in the show notes, of course. So
take it for a
take a
test
look at
drive.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
So,
All right.
PIM, what about PIM? What's going on in PIM world?
Yeah, so we've been talking. I think we've mentioned PIM in most of our episodes, right? And
Yeah.
I often talk about it and just assume everyone knows what I'm talking about. But I thought, I've been spending a lot of time lately just kind of looking at PIM and helping customers um, onboard PIM into the environment, right? And I kind of thought it would be good to put together some notes on this. So I've got 5 tips to kind of help you get going. But I also wanted to just kind of talk about PIM a little bit. I think this is one of those sort of must-have features in in your M365 tenant. If you are using Entra, which you are, if you're using M365, you really should have PIM for your admin or privileged user accounts, right? And so I wanted to just just dive into it a little bit. So
Yeah,
um,
and Chris, I see PIM being used a lot with my customers,
mhm.
but I rarely see it used correctly.
Well, that's part of it too, right? Because y- y- you've got to be very careful as to like when you configure this stuff. How do you how much change is too much change in one go, right? Because you can go from zero to hero very quickly with the stuff, but as you tweak all the settings and things, you also make the administrative workflow of your admin users more difficult. So it really is it's important to kind of think about what you're doing and how you're interrupting the sort of the workflow of your users, and whether those interruptions are worthwhile or not, right? So yeah, hopefully this will provide some insight. But for folks who don't know what PIM is, when we talk about PIM, we're talking about Entra Privileged Identity Management. And what that is it's a way to provide sort of just in time and approval based, if you need it, access to roles within within Entra, or within Azure. So if you have Azure resources, it can be an Azure role, it can be an Entra role, and it can also be a group. And so depending on what you're doing, these things may or may not be worthwhile to you. The easiest way, or the best sort of scenario to talk about when we talk about PIM, is to think about your administrators. If you're looking at an M365 from an M365 perspective, so think about folks who, for example, have global administrator rights, right? So typically you would have, now I would hope by now everyone who has a global admin has at least a separate account that is, not your primary everyday user account. And that separate account has no license assigned, and it has the global admin role. And so if you've got to go do tenant admin, or some sort of administrative function, you're logging into maybe a different browser window with that account, MFA, and then once you've logged in, you can go do all your things. Now, what PIM does is what we call just-in-time access, or JIT access. So it brings the ability to elevate your access when you need the access. So if you're only doing admin tasks for an hour or 2 hours of the workday, your account can only be granted that access for that amount of time. You don't have to have an account with full permanent access to the global admin role, or to the user admin role, or whatever other role. You basically are just elevating for the time and the duration that you have it. So all every other time of the day, or when you're not using that account, the account doesn't actually have any roles or rights assigned to it. It has an eligibility, but it doesn't actually have any roles, right? So just in time, and that's probably one of the most important functions of PIM. But it also brings things like approval workflows, where you could actually have a workflow where other users have to approve your elevation. So if you have, for example, a group of global admins and someone wants to elevate, other global admins can approve that elevation. You can have additional MFA enforcement. So when you elevate to a role, even though you've already MFA'd, elevating to the role will then trigger another MFA function, and this stuff is tied a little bit to your conditional access as well. But you can have that sort of MFA, and then you can do access reviews, and it helps with audit logging and notifications, for example, of when folks have elevated, and stuff like that. So there's a great deal to this, as to being able to manage your privileged identities, right? That's why it's called PIM, or privileged identity management.
What's in
So
the name?
yeah, exactly right. And so if we think about one of the things about PIM, and I guess looking at the licensing, and everyone's probably thinking to themselves, more licenses, like, do we really need to pay for more licenses? I would say it can be complicated to understand, but if you just boil it down to, and the way I always think about it is, PIM is an Entra ID Plan 2 feature or capability, right? So typically, you're either going to have Entra ID Plan 2 as a separate license, a standalone product, or you might have it as part of your E5 SKU. Um, but because this falls under, or is part of Entra ID governance, you may also have it as part of I think there are 6 different ways to buy Entra ID governance as an add-on. And it also is part of the Entra Suite. So we've been talking about Entra Suite in the last
Yeah.
couple of episodes. So if you have Entra Suite, you also have Entra ID governance, which means you will have PIM. Like I said, it can get really complicated. I've got a diagram in the show notes as to like what the licensing looks like, but really the way I remember it is Entra ID Plan 2. That's kind of what you need.
Yeah.
And I was talking about the sort of the example before is, typically this would be something that you have an admin in your industry, in your business, someone who's your global admin. They have a separate account. This is something that, if you're going to assign a license to that account, you would have an Entra ID P2 license for that user. You don't need a mailbox, you don't need those things, but you need the P2 license, which gives them PIM, and they will then use that account for their privileged access, and to elevate, right? So that's why I'm a very big advocate for saying you must have this in your environment for everyone who has an elevated account, right?
Yeah.
for most environments, your elevation. Now, I've seen some very large environments where, the uh, very large environments, large IT and cyber teams, and between all of the roles and stuff, there are maybe a dozen folks who have needed a license for PIM for the various roles that they have, right? And then um, if you take that a step further and you include folks who do help desk roles and all of that type of stuff, I've seen some very large environments where their license count is something like 40, right? Because this isn't something you have to go give to everyone, and because of that, I think it really makes a lot of sense to look at this and say we need to have this as a bare minimum standard for our tenant. If anyone who has a role that is what is considered a highly privileged role should have a PIM license and should be using this. The cost of this is not significant, and if you think about how much you're reducing that sort of attack surface and sort of risk profile, excuse me, by doing that, it really just it makes a whole lot of sense, right? So like I said before, from a deployment perspective, you can manage Entra roles, Azure resource roles, and then group memberships. And I've got some tips here on sort of how to do this. Right, the tip number one, I think, something that I found to be really useful is start with an audit. So before you actually go and enable PIM and give everyone a license and all of that type of stuff, and from a licensing perspective, again, I've seen a lot of customers who have taken the step up to E5. Well, if you've gone up to E5, you already have PIM for everyone, so it's
Yeah.
not that big of a deal anyway. But before you just go and assign licenses to everyone, take a second, go into the Entra portal, export all of your privileged roles. You can export it to CSV, and it'll give you an full export of all the role and who has those roles, and just do a bit of an audit, right? I've gotten really good at building these spreadsheets now of audits because you want to be able to take a look at what roles are being used, and who is using the roles. Is that access still relevant? Because you may find that it was set up a while back and those folks don't need access anymore, they don't want it, or what have you, right? So first, before you do anything, just do an audit, do a review of your roles, make sure that everything is still accurate, and then start looking at how you do it. I mentioned that I think it should be an absolute minimum standard for what I would deem to be highly privileged roles, right? And I've listed out some roles here that I think are the highly privileged roles, right? So obviously your global admin, your compliance administrator, exchange administrator, there's a whole bunch of them here that I've listed out. I think that those are like the bare minimum of roles. Anyone who has that access to that one of those roles should have PIM.
Yeah.
But I also think that for those highly privileged roles, you want to limit the activation window or activation duration to something like 4 hours or less. I've worked in some very highly sort of secured environments where you can't activate a PIM role in one of these for one of these roles for more than 2 hours at a time, right? Your mileage will vary. I think depending on your environment, I think 4 hours is a really good window for most folks, because even if you do, and we all know users are going to always activate the maximum they can, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to have to keep coming back. So allow 4 hours. Someone's going to activate it for 4 hours. They're probably only going to use it for half an hour, but at least 3.5 hours later, that activation disappears, and that account goes back to just being a regular user account. So I've listed them in here. I think the highly privileged ones, a 4 hour activation window. All the other ones, I think 8 hours is perfectly fine. But obviously think about your environment and your risk profile. Tip three is something that I recently learned, right? And I wanted to share this because even I learn stuff all the time. And the tip is it's okay to mix direct and group based assignments, right? But you need to think about it. And this can get a little iffy, but bear with me. When I first started implementing PIM, I was all about direct assignments because there are a lot of benefits, especially from an audit perspective, for how you, when you directly assign a role to a user account. So, we've always been taught back in the day, users become members of groups and then you
Yeah.
assign permissions to the group, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing the PIM stuff, it makes a lot of sense to be making the user or directly assigning the role to the user, because then the user has the role They can see it as a role within their the PIM portal, and they can activate that role. Well, what happens when a user has multiple roles? Well, no problem, and it makes a lot of sense. And I have a screenshot in the show notes, just a little way up. But you can actually have multiple roles, and the user can actually pick which is the least privileged role for what they're doing, right? So if someone has Teams administrator and global admin, and they only want to go do something in the Teams admin center, well, the right thing to do would be to activate the Teams admin role, right?
Yeah. I
Uh,
hope they will
um,
do that as well instead of
well,
just
that's
requesting
a
global
culture
admin
in a
thing.
in a
Yeah.
exactly. Not everyone will do that, right? But ideally, in an ideal world, if someone has multiple role assignments, you'd want them to sort of be conditioned to be picking the role that is least privileged for what it is they're going to do, and activating that role, right? So I've always been a very big fan of like direct assignments, but there are some times when that doesn't work, right? If you think, for example, and a specific scenario that I came across recently was, if you think about a help desk where you have users in a help desk that they do a lot of functions in their day to day, right? So they have an elevated account, and they may do a password reset here, or an MFA reset here, or they may do something with devices in Intune, or they may do something with devices in Entra. So they actually have a collection of settings, or that they do, permissions that don't clearly fit into one role. It might be three or four different roles, right? Now, using my example before, you would add all four of those roles to the user, and you'd have that help this person make the decision as to what it is they're doing.
Mm.
It's not always practical for you to expect someone to know what role exactly is required for them to do the tasks that they're doing, right? And so, in those instances, it may actually be better to add those roles to a group,
Yeah.
um, and then give the user an eligibility to the group. So same situation, except this time, instead of them activating a role, they're activating a group membership. And so, when they log into PIM, they'll see, as part of their groups, there's an eligibility there for, the help desk admins group, for example, and they can activate the membership of that role, which will then in turn give them all of the roles, that are assigned to that particular group. And from there, they can do what they need to do, and the same rules apply, right? So this is something that I learned myself recently, and I thought it would be a really good tip to pass along. Is, it's okay to mix direct and group based assignments, but think about it, because you don't want conflicts either, right?
One of the things we do as an MSSP, Chris, for our security analysts, we have a group in the customer environment where both Defender, Entra, and Azure permission are assigned to. So by
Mm.
just having them to be able to PIM a single group instead of three or more separate roles, it saves them a lot of time as well. One thing I do hate with those setups, for some reason, an Entra role or Azure permissions, you can make eligible through PIM and then make the eligibility to never expire so that it will stays in place forever. With a group, there's a maximum of 12 months, 6 months, I believe, for some reason. So the eligibility will end somewhere along the
And you have
road.
to
You
renew
have
it.
to
Yeah.
keep in mind
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and extend that before it expires. Otherwise,
Yes.
you'll probably lose access to the environment. And the way we work around this is by asking our clients to get permissions to extend it ourselves. But then you need quite extensive permissions on an API level. So I hope Microsoft will
Mm.
perhaps give us the
And I
ability
think
to
that
have that.
ties into the access reviews part, right? Because ultimately, what you're wanting to do is have access reviews run across the group memberships and the eligibilities for a period of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really good call out. And I think another place where the group stuff really works is if you're doing custom roles. So if you have created and I think custom Entra roles are fine, but custom Azure roles are fine, but custom Entra roles historically haven't worked so well with PIM. So a way to make that work is you assign those custom roles to the group, and then you have the user activate the group membership instead, and
Yeah.
that works out really well. So, there's so much capability and functionality here. It's definitely important to kind of map this stuff out before you actually just go and deploy. Um, So tip four I have is always MFA. In my mind, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't always request a multi-factor when someone activates a role, right? There's not going to be accidental role activation. That's not a thing. People are going to willingly go in and click the activate button and put in the justification or what have you. So I think it doesn't matter if they're security, if they're a global reader or global admin, just do another MFA prompt. Like it really is, it's an extra safety mechanism that
Yeah.
is definitely worthwhile. Um, and then the last tip I have is approval workflows can be really painful, right? If you're in a sort of highly regulated environment where a global admin role has to be approved by others before you can activate it, stuff like that. I mean, that's all great. It's great that we have that capability and the functionality, but it doesn't work like that for every environment, right? If you've got three admins in your environment, you're just going to be really annoying them if each time one of them wants to activate a role, the other two have to sign off on the it's just not going to work so well. So really think about, if you are going to use approval workflows, they definitely have their place, but if you're going to use them, really think about what you're doing to your admin workflow, your administrators and their daily work when you require approval. And I think it's a really bad idea to just require approval for all roles. You're not going to be very popular if you do that. So
No.
really, really something to think about.
And something,
Um,
Chris, I want to add to the MFA part. We also seen customers struggling with onboarding the fish-resistant MFA methods like passkeys, FIDO keys. But you can, with conditional access, you can at least require those for the global admins, for example. So
yeah,
not regular MFA into the portal, but once you PIM into global admin, the conditional access policy will kick in, asking you to do a step up MFA, ask for your passkey, just to be sure that we do not have any man in the middle or token
yeah.
theft or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great, and that it's a good call out that this stuff does work and tie in very tightly with conditional access. So also you got to think about your activation windows and your timeout windows. If you have session timeouts in conditional access, those things will affect each other. So don't have one set to every time and have the other set to 4 hours and all of that type of stuff, because then you are going to have some different user experiences with users and MFA prompts and things like that. So that's a good call out, guys. So that, I mean, that sort of in a nutshell is PIM. It's a actually really it's a really simple solution when you kind of dive into it, but I think it does take a little bit of just careful planning and consideration when you actually want to deploy it. So I wanted to kind of
Yeah.
share some of the things that I've been thinking about a fair bit lately. And so our community project for this month is also sort of on the PIM lines. It's a project called Easy PIM, and it's uh, created by someone who works at Microsoft. And I'm going to try the French pronunciation here, but man, I don't know. Loic, I think is his name.
Loic, yeah, could be.
Loic
Yeah.
Michel.
Yeah.
Um, he's created this PowerShell
Michel.
module.
Loic
Michel.
Michel.
There we go. I should have got you. You speak French. I should have got you
I don't
to
speak
do
French. My
it.
French is from 20 years ago, school French, high school French.
High
Yeah.
school French. Oui. um,
Baguette, parapluie, oui. Yeah, things like that.
and so EasyPIM is the project created by Loic, who actually works at Microsoft in the Azure Identity team, or I guess it's the Entra Identity team now. It's a PowerShell module. If you've ever worked with PIM using the graph modules, it can get a little funky because you've got all these long IDs and things that you're kind of working with. So
Mm.
this PowerShell module just makes it so much easier. There's like 30 commandlets in there. It uses the Graph API and a bunch of other things to kind of make managing PIM much easier just from day-to-day management. But it also allows you to do things like back up your roles and import export roles. If you have like a baseline, if you're a consultant and you have a baseline of PIM roles and stuff like that, this makes working with that really simple and really easy. So I wanted to kind of shout out the project. It's on GitHub as always, very active in the development as well. Like it's almost every week I see updates from him on this. I think there was like an update 2 days ago. So they're very active on this EasyPIM. It's on GitHub. Go and check it out, and if you like it, give it a star and give Loic some feedback.
Yeah, great find.
Yeah, I must say, I really love the community sort of segment here, because very often, these are things that I have sort of found over time,
Yeah.
but it also has made me sort of be on the lookout now for more things, right? Whenever I see someone doing cool stuff on LinkedIn or whatever, it's I immediately sort of go and take a look at it and mess around with it and stuff. And I love being able to share the stuff with folks, because GitHub especially can be, there's so much there, right? But if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
just need that little tool sometimes that just makes your life so much easier, and it's nice to
Yeah.
be able to say to someone, "Hey, have you seen this thing? It can take that, that 2 hour task and turn it into a 20-minute task, right? It
Yeah.
just makes so
So
much
much
easier."
great stuff out there created by the community. It's great that
Yeah,
we provide a platform for that.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, folks, I think that kind of brings us to the end of probably a little bit longer than usual episode, but
Yes.
it's
Sorry
sometimes
for
it's
that,
nice for
people.
Koos and I to catch up as well, and just sort of see what each other have been up to, other than just WhatsApp messages. Um, I wanted to draw your attention, I guess, again, to the Experts Live conference, Experts Live US in New York. I think 10th of October, October 10th. Koos and I will both be there. We'll put some links in the show notes for information about it. There are just some incredibly awesome speakers at this conference. One thing I can't actually understand how this is going to work yet, Coast, is how we can cram this all into one day. Because if you look at all the awesome speakers, like it
Yeah.
is, and there's this, Coast is traveling from the Netherlands. I'll be traveling here from Australia. I know a bunch of other folks from all over the place going to be there. And the speakers are just crazy. So it
Yeah.
really is.
And to
Yeah.
point out, it's a community effort. So Experts Live is not paying any of us to come there to speak. They're not paying for any travel expenses. So this is really a community event. So people are there on their own costs, or perhaps their employer helped out. But that's also
Mm.
the reason why the admission ticket of admission is so cheap. And like you said earlier, great value, $75, which goes to a good cause. You
Mm.
get some drinks and a lunch out of that, and a lot of knowledge. So it's
Mm.
a no
I
brainer
think it's
actually.
15. I think it's $15, is
Oh,
it not?
$15 actually. Oh
I think it's
wow,
$15. Yeah. So I mean,
crazy.
it's the cost of a coffee in New York City,
Yes,
pretty much, I'm sure.
yes,
So
and I can acknowledge that in Las Vegas, $10 for cappuccino. Oh my god. Well,
yeah,
enough on that. But yeah,
yeah.
no, really great. And I believe they have multiple tracks as well. I'm not really sure
And
about
that
that.
must probably be how this is all going to work, right? There must
Yeah,
be three at least, or four different tracks with all the
yeah.
speakers in there. Because I mean, there are some great people going to be speaking. So
Yeah. It's at the
yeah,
Microsoft office at Times Square, so also great location. Really looking
yeah.
forward. Never been there.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've been there once or twice for some other things, but yeah, it'll be fun. So anyway, folks, more about that. We'll add the links to the show notes. As always, much appreciate you joining us for the episode, and thank you for supporting us. If you like the show, like, subscribe, and send us some feedback on the socials if there's anything you are particularly interested in. Until next time, though, we'll see you soon with some of the latest and greatest in the Microsoft security space. So, Coast,
Yeah.
thanks for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm about to sign off for mine. So,
Thanks, Chris. And remember, everybody, lake it till you make it. Bye bye.